Hello friends, so we will be talking about American drama, its growth, its origin, how it all began. I am going to talk about the historical origin of drama in America, the major genres, the major playwrights and dramatists, and the key movements down the ages. Now, American drama began with farces and comedies. As a dramatic form, as you would know, farce originated in France. It soon spread throughout Europe and remained popular through the 18th and 19th centuries. In America, the first play ever to be written and published was Robert Hunter's a play called Androboros, a biographical farce in 3 acts, which was 1714, a political satire and also a well known farce. So, the first known play, at least most popular and most well known of that period. I am sure there were other plays as well, but this is one of the foremost that has come to be documented. Thomas Godfrey's neoclassical tragedy, The Prince of Parthia, was published in or written in 1767 and is often considered the first play by an American produced professionally, and American was still a British colony at that time. Godfrey combines the elements of romance and politics, and the play's themes rest on balancing the conflicting demands of love and honor. Another important playwright was Royal Tyler, who wrote The Contrast in 1787, which is a comedy written by an American author with a setting in the United States. The author was clearly inspired by Sheridan and Sheridan's The School for Scandal and Wycherley's The Plain Dealer. The Contrast is also noted for its depiction of the first native character of American theatre, Jonathan the Servant. In the first few years of the 20th century, Americans started taking an interest in writing plays. Prominent names of this period were Clyde Fitch, Augustus Thomas, Edward Sheldon, Stephen Phillips, and many more, though they are almost forgotten today. Drama came into its own with the works of Maxwell Anderson and Lawrence Stallings' What Price Glory, one of the most well known plays of its time, performed in 1924, a comedy drama that and it also enjoyed great success on the Broadway. Now, America or American theatre scene was also known for its great musicals, and the origin was vaudeville. Do you know what is vaudeville? The term refers to comic, musical and acrobatic acts in the theatre. Though vaudeville could not compete with cinema, it is still practiced even now in some forms in our modern times. The Theatre Guild, this is another important concept that you should know. The Theatre Guild, it brought together artists like Richard Rogers and Oscar Hammerstein together, and they collaborated on masterpieces, and we are talking about the great musicals of the age, Oklahoma, The King and I, and South Pacific. I will repeat, Oklahoma, The King and I, and South Pacific, all Rogers and Hammerstein collaboration. The Broadway is known for several musical extravaganzas as Annie, Get Your Gun, Cabaret, Cats, Jesus Christ Superstar, The Phantom of the Opera, Nine, The Lion King, Hair, Les Miserables and Mamma Mia. So, down the ages, and they are still performed, as you are well aware of. I mean, the popularity of these musicals has always been on the rise. An important organization of this period, I am talking about the early 30s and the late 20s, was the formation of something called the group theatre. The group theatre was formed in 1931 by 3 important personalities, theatre personalities, Harold Clurman, Cheryl Crawford, and Lee Strasberg. The aim was to present American plays of social relevance. A typical group production was a social protest play with often a leftist viewpoint. The first attempt of the group was the production group, as in capital G, group theatre with capital G and a capital T. So, the first attempt of the group was the production of Sergei Tretakov's Roar China, followed by Paul Green's House of Cornally, and next came two anti-capitalist plays, 1931 by Claire and Paul Sifton, and Success Story by John Howard Lawson. The group's first major success came with Sidney Kingsley's Men in White, which is a hospital drama, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. So, the play was performed first in 1933. The play was considered very bold for its time, Men in White, especially for its depiction of a gruesome operation to try to save the life of a young woman who is victimized by an illegal abortion. She gets pregnant by one of the doctors, and what happens to her. So, this was one of the first times that the word abortion was used on stage, and threw the spotlight on a very important social issue. We have already seen Theodore Dreiser and the impact of pregnancies out of wedlock. So, this was this play can be seen in as a companion to a very socially relevant issues. So, the play dramatized the significance of the struggle for legalized abortion. It makes a case for that, and reminding us of the stigma of out of wedlock pregnancies. Now, another important organization was Federal Theatre Project. So, the group theatre soon paved way for the Works Progress Administration, and this was Federal Theatre Project was an offshoot of WPA. It was a project that was to have a major cultural impact in America through its various arts projects for writers, artists, musicians and performers. An initiative of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The purpose of FTP or Federal Theatre Project was to create jobs for the unemployed theatrical people during the Great Depression years of 1935 and 39. During that period, several of the productions included classical as well as modern drama, children's plays, puppet shows, musicals and documentary theatre known as living newspaper. FTP also staged plays by young unknown American playwrights and also reflected support for Black American theatre or the growth of Black American theatre. The FTP was terminated in 1939 by congressional action due to investigations by the HUAC or the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Theatre Guild was the next major organization. Essentially, it evolved out of the Washington Square Players. It was founded in New York by Lawrence Langer in 1918 and was committed to produce high quality non-commercial plays from America and also from other parts of the world. The Guild famously produced 15 plays by Bernard Shaw, including Back to Methuselah and Saint John. American playwrights whose works were produced included Pulitzer Prize winners Sidney Howard, William Saroyan, Maxwell Anderson and Robert Sherwood. The Theatre Guild contributed to American musical theatre by producing Porgy and Bess by George Gershwin, Ira Gershwin and Dubus Hayward. A major player of this period was the playwright Clifford Odets, who lived between 1906 and 1963. Odets' Waiting for Lefty, his 1937 play, has now acquired the status of a legend in the annals of American theatre. The play was the winner of a one-act social play contest sponsored by the New Theatre League and New Theatre magazine. It takes place at a taxi drivers union meeting and dramatizes the events leading towards the workers' strike. The play used flashback techniques and plants in the audience to create the impression that the strikers' meeting was occurring simultaneously. This device anticipated the plays of more experimental playwrights such as Jean Italy and Auguste Boal. The group went on to stage Odets Awake and Sing, Till the Day I Die, Paradise Lost and Golden Boy. Odets wrote the play to give vent to the discontent of workers in the Depression and comes out with a truly American agitprop theatre, which is theatre of drama of agitation and propaganda. As you would know, agitprop is a dramatic form that had been popular with revolutionary groups in Germany and Russia during the 1920s and the 30s. Odets popularized the term and this kind of stage in America. The leftist ideology is clearly visible in Waiting for Lefty. The choice between bowing down to a corrupt capitalist system and a socialist alternative. So, that is the key theme of Waiting for Lefty. Odets' ideas were to have a far reaching impact on the new left and liberal writers of the 1970s and 80s also. The triumvirate of the most important writers of the 20th century American theatre were of course Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller. We are going to discuss these playwrights also during the next couple of lectures. So, I will not be doing that in them in detail today, but you have to know these names. Now, this was also a period where there were two other major playwrights, and those were Robert Anderson and William Inge. Now, Robert Anderson is best remembered for his play called Tea and Sympathy, a 1948 work, which is an indictment of the way gender roles have been prescribed and constructed in America. The play is remarkable for its treatment of homophobia. So, the hero is Tom Lee, a sensitive 18-year-old schoolboy who is bullied by his schoolmates and his housemaster, Bill Reynolds. The only person who understands him is Reynolds' neglected wife, Laura, who offers Tom tea and sympathy. So, that is the title of the play. Robert Anderson's works like William Inge offered themes that contain some of the taboo elements of sexuality that were more aggressively highlighted in the works of Tennessee Williams. William Inge is an important dramatist of the 1950s. He was one of the first American dramatists to focus on the quality of life in small American towns. His best works include Come Back Little Sheba, Picnic, Bus Stop, and he also wrote the original screenplay for Splendor in the Grass film. It is also a film directed by the great stage and film director Elia Kazan. I would like to talk about realism and the American stage. So, it was in the 1880s when critics like William Dean Howell and Hamlet Garland began to note the elements of realism in the works of playwrights such as James A. Hearn, Edward Harrigan and William Gillette. Okay, so, these were the realists of the American stage. So, the great American playwrights, the most well known among them would be Henrik Ibsen or Bernard Shaw and also Herman Sunderman. So, all of whom are known for their realistic playwriting. These are the Europeans, Ibsen, Shaw and Sunderman. So, they are known for the realistic depiction of life and people and themes on stage. The budding American playwrights looked towards the European masters for the realistic aesthetics. The plays of James Hearn, for example, Margaret Fleming, were particularly close to the everyday lives of the common people. Clyde Fitch was another popular and prolific playwright whose The Climbers and The City reflected how attuned he was to the sounds and patterns of actual speech of his characters. An extremely successful Broadway production was David Belasco's romantic tragedy Madame Butterfly, which was written in 1900 and written with John Luther Long. Expressionism. Now, realism was followed by expressionism, which was a literary technique, actually not a genre, but a technique. And we should know that the first modernist movement in the theatre after symbolism to have a major international impact was expressionism. As an artistic movement, it started in European countries such as Germany. In the 1920s, American theatre experimented with expressionism with Elmer Reese's The Adding Machine, a play that ridiculed the depersonalization, dehumanization drudges of capitalism. John Howard Lawson used expressionism for agitational purposes in Roger Bloomer and Processional. These are the plays which were written in 1920s. And another example of expressionism was Irwin Shaw's anti-militarist Bury the Dead. The most notable American exponent of expressionism was Eugene O'Neill. In The Emperor Jones, he put subjective visions on the stage. In The Hairy Ape, which was performed in 1922, he turned both oppressors and oppressed in a class society into puppets, and in All God's Children God Wings, he portrayed racial conflict in boldly two-dimensional imagery. We will be doing Eugene O'Neill soon, so we will talk about O'Neill's expressionism, his use of expressionistic devices in greater detail. Now, from there we move on to avant-garde and surrealist kind of theatre and also modernism. You know what is modernism? This is a term applied to various developments in all art forms in the late 19th and early 20th century. Many of these developments having a distinctly anti-realistic slant. Some of the elements in modernism suggest a revival of the romantic spirit of the early 19th century, especially the concerns with internal reality. Modernist art was iconoclastic, often with a specific conception of making way for a new art form for the future. Indeed, the first major modernist movement of the new century was called Futurism, a movement that celebrated speed, change, technology and revolutionary upheavals in art and politics. Introversion, technical displays, self-skepticism, they remain the key features of modernists and modernist literature and modernist characters. Landmark event of this period was the establishment of Moscow Art Theatre, founded in 1898, which had most closely been associated with realism and particularly with the director and leading actor Konstantin Stanislavski. Stanislavski method was grounded, he is known for his theory of method acting. So, the theories was grounded in psychological realism and led this theatre to establish a number of experimental studios to explore alternative approaches of acting and direction. Stanislavski's techniques were later refined by Lee Strasberg, who used his theory of method acting to hone the skills of several great American stage and film actors. Another important movement, theatre movement of this period was the growth, the rise of the theatre of the absurd. is basically a European import, a construct from Europe. In the 1890, the French dramatists, or rather French dramatists, several of whom had intellectual connections with the modernists, spearheaded this new wave in the world of theatre. Samuel Beckett had served as secretary for James Joyce, Fernando Arrabal, and he was a member of Andre Breton's Surrealist circle, and also Eugene Ionesco. He was fascinated by the works of someone called Alfred Jarry. Now, Jarry's King Ubu, UBU, King Ubu, is one of the most revolutionary works presented at the Symbolist Theatre de Oeuvre, which is now hailed as a precursor of the new modernist theatre movement, represented by writers like Ionesco, Beckett and Arrabal, and came to be known as the theatre of the absurd. The non-realistic characters and settings of these plays placed by these people naturally posed a challenge to traditional approaches to acting and scenic designs. So, this was the origin of the theatre of the absurd in Europe, and what happened in America. Now, Edward Albee was a keen practitioner of the theatre of the absurd in America. He used absurdism to explore American values and human interaction. Edward Albee wrote this or wrote most of his plays at a time when American culture, I am talking basically about his foremost of seminal grand play, Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So, he wrote this play at a time when American culture was willing to take a more objectively intensive view of its personal institutions, specifically here in this play, Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf, looking at or deconstructing the institution of marriage. So, his one act play, The Zoo Story, published in 1959 or performed in 1959 rather, revolves its setting around or story around a man who sits on a public park bench and is joined by another man who has a profound difficulty in communicating and bearing under the weight of numerous personal problems, and these characters are mentally disconnected and live in an agitated state. This is the action of the play, and of course, his most important play, much performed play, remains Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, where he examined modern married life and its illusions. Another important movement was the experimental theatre, the rise and growth of experimental theatre in the United States, which roughly about started from 1959 after being tried out at Black Mountain College in North Carolina. So, some of the key figures and their works include Alan Kaproff's multi-art form adventure 18 Happenings in 6 parts. So, 18 Happenings in 6 parts is a very experimental kind of a play which combines multi-art forms. So, you can look it up on the net and understand more about this. The work anticipated many features of today's performance and experimentation. For example, the use of simultaneously but seemingly unrelated action and movement. The audience often becomes the participant and performer, and a fragmented non-narrative structure using a mix of dance, live recorded sound and multimedia technology. Soon after, other artists experimented with art environments, sometimes even using their bodies as canvas for painting and sketching on them. Then there is another important group, again under the broad area of experimental theatre, the Wooster group is the most experimental working group, theatre group in the United States, and it is led by the director Elizabeth Lacombe. Now, productions deconstructed classic works by Arthur Miller, Thornton Wilder and Eugene O'Neill by splicing these texts with varied material, including a technological inclusion of video images and amplified voice. By the 1990s, most performance art expressed concerns with the self and its identity in relation to society, and in America theatre has always retained its significance, exploring subjects of special interest to those communities traditionally on the margins of powers, particularly women, gays or ethnic groups. And these are the references. Please take a look at this reading list for more understanding, better understanding of American drama and theatre. So, thank you very much.